Whispers can dismantle an empire far more cleanly than gunpowder. And tonight, inside the blinding, multi-million-pound marble walls of the newly constructed Pembroke Mansion in London's opulent Mayfair district, the high society vultures are feasting on what they believe is an absolute nobody. If you look closely through the swirling haze of expensive imported tobacco and the flashing glare of thousands of gilded gas lamps illuminating a sea of pastel silks and emerald velvet, you will see them. Women wrapped in luxury and draped in diamond-encrusted tiaras are fluttering their ivory fans, leaning in close to murmur the latest, most delicious piece of malice to sweep through the winter season of 1888. They are pointing their fans toward the grand mahogany service doors. And there, standing entirely in the shadows, is a solitary woman. She wears a severely plain, high-collared black uniform. If the light catches her at the correct angle, the sharpest eyes in the room can tell the dress has been hastily altered, let out at the seams, and retrimmed by a desperate maid to appear brand new. To the casual observer, she carries herself with the rigid, practiced composure of an aristocrat who refuses to break. But beneath her heavy layers of stiff crinoline petticoats, her heart is beating a frantic, agonizing rhythm against her ribs. The society matrons, led by the most venomous gossips of the West End, have already dismissed her. They call her an invisible phantom, a lowly scullery girl existing entirely on their discarded scraps. Tonight, the wealthiest fortune hunters in the British Empire are preparing to publicly execute her dignity, to humiliate her so thoroughly that she will never dare cross the threshold of polite society again. They look at her calloused hands, her grease-stained apron tucked into the shadows, and they see a peasant waiting for scraps. What they do not know, what they cannot possibly comprehend, is that the game has already been played to its absolute, lethal conclusion. They see a woman with empty hands and no leverage. They have no idea that inside the heavy, armored iron vault of London's most ruthless bank, the master title deeds to every square inch of the very land they stand on bear only her true signature. They think she has come to beg for their mercy. They don't know that before the final note of the string quartet dies out, this supposed kitchen maid will force the entire House of Lords to drop to their absolute knees. If you have ever been dismissed, looked down upon, or forced to swallow your pride while small-minded tyrants celebrated your apparent ruin, this story is your absolute tactical blueprint. What you are about to witness is not a simple story of historical romance or lucky timing. It is a calculated, cold-blooded psychological execution. Over the next 20 minutes, I am going to dissect the precise mechanics of a total social reversal. We are going to break down the exact process of how a completely discarded outsider weaponized absolute invisibility to systematically strip her abusers of their wealth, their titles, and their dignity. Pay close attention to every single detail. Every shifting look in this narrative is a masterclass in how to let your enemies dig their own graves while they think they are burying you. There is a specific, suffocating torment in being forced to play the victim in a game you didn't create. It is that heavy, sickening feeling that settles in your chest when you walk into a room and realize that people have already decided your value based on your current circumstances, your lack of capital, or the malicious lies spread by cowards who fear your true potential. The worst part of this experience isn't the overt cruelty of your enemies. It is the patronizing, suffocating pity of the onlookers, the people who offer a soft, artificial smile to your face while secretly keeping a meticulous score of your failures behind your back. In the ruthless arena of high society, just like in the modern world, the matrix of human judgment demands a simple rule. If you do not possess visible wealth or immediate leverage, you are expected to cower. You are expected to accept whatever crumbs they throw at you and thank them for the privilege. But true power does not roar. True power does not parade itself through the streets or brag at cocktail parties. What happens when you decide to stop cowering? What happens when you intentionally lean into their low expectations, letting them believe they have completely broken you, simply to ensure they never see the final blow coming? To survive a den of vipers, you must first master the psychology of hypervisible invisibility. Most people make a fatal strategic error the moment they are targeted by an oppressor. They react immediately. They argue, they cry, or they strike back in a fit of hot, unguided anger. This is exactly what the predator wants. When you react with emotion, you betray your hand. You reveal your triggers, you expose your defensive boundaries, and you show your enemy exactly where you are bleeding. Elite strategists, however, do the exact opposite. They lean entirely into the low, demeaning role their enemies have constructed for them. You wear their expectations like armor. You let them believe you are helpless, broken, and entirely devoid of options. Why? Because an arrogant enemy is an incredibly sloppy enemy. When a predator firmly believes their prey has surrendered, their internal defensive perimeter completely collapses. They stop checking their flanks. They store their deepest secrets right out in the open, entirely unprotected. They speak loudly in rooms they think are secure, and they leave the keys to their fortunes lying on the table. And that is the exact moment you move from the role of the hunted to the absolute architect of their execution. To truly understand how this psychological matrix operates when executed with absolute precision, we must travel back to a rainy, wind-whipped autumn evening on the desolate moors of Yorkshire in the year 1888. The driving rain was lashing violently against the brick townhouses, and inside the grand but fading ancestral estate of the Sinclair family, a final act of betrayal was being signed into law. For 24-year-old Lady Genevieve Sinclair, the cold was not just a matter of the changing weather. It was a permanent state of her daily existence. Just 6 months prior, her father, the most brilliant financial auditor for the Crown Treasury, had died under highly suspicious circumstances, suffering a sudden heart attack just days after uncovering a multi-million-pound embezzlement ring operating directly within the House of Lords. He left behind a legacy of engineered, catastrophic debt that had been completely manufactured by his closest business associates. The moment his body was in the ground, her ruthless, gambling uncle, Lord Reginald, moved in like a vulture. Reginald seized control of the family's independent shipping docks, siphoned the remaining trust accounts, and reduced Genevieve to the status of an unpaid servant in her own ancestral home, forcing her to scrub the stone floors of the kitchens alongside the scullery staff to pay off her father's artificial debts. He was laying the groundwork to have her quietly committed to a private asylum so he could hold the purse strings of her family's trust forever. The catalyst for Reginald's ultimate greed arrived when his own gambling markers at the clubs in London caught up to him. Facing immediate financial ruin and a debtor's prison, Reginald brokered a horrific transaction behind closed doors. He offered Genevieve's hand in marriage to an aging, abusive baron twice her age to clear his own gambling debts. Society fully expected the penniless, ruined girl to weep with gratitude for the match that would save her family from starvation. Instead, during a public assembly at Almack's, Genevieve looked the powerful baron dead in the eye, raised her chin, and told him his wealth could not buy a human soul, declaring she would rather work the scullery lines for life than ever share his bed. The scandal was instantaneous and devastating. The elite patronesses of the Ton blacklisted her immediately, cutting her direct from polite society. She became a phantom haunting the dark corners of her uncle's house. But what her uncle did not know, what no one in the entire city of London knew, was that Genevieve's father had trained her well. He had brought her into the shipyards, taught her how to read the complex, multi-layered ledgers, and left her with the master cryptographic cipher to his private files before his death. She wasn't an unstable victim. She was an elite analytical mind waiting for the proper alignment of power. That alignment arrived exactly 3 days before the grand winter solstice ball. Under the cover of a dense coastal fog, a massive, black-lacquered carriage bearing no visible coat of arms pulled silently into the rear stables of the Sinclair docks. Emerging from the velvet-lined interior was Tristan Pendleton, the 8th Duke of Westford. To understand the sheer terror Tristan inspired in the halls of Parliament and the boardrooms of London, one must understand his reputation. At 32, he was an ex-naval commander who had survived the brutal campaigns of the frontier, a man carved entirely from iron and absolute, unyielding pragmatic power. He controlled the deep-water ports of England and possessed a fortune that rivaled the crown itself. He was notoriously unmarried, entirely unapproachable, and utterly immune to the social traps set by ambitious mothers. He didn't deal in sentiment. He dealt exclusively in victory. He had tracked Genevieve down not out of romance, but out of a shared, burning desire for retribution. Standing in the dim, dust-choked library of her uncle's house, the Duke looked down at Genevieve with eyes the color of a stormy winter sea. He did not offer her empty platitudes or gentle words. He spoke only in the cold language of leverage. He told her that her father had been murdered because he discovered that Lord Reginald and his elite syndicate were illegally selling federal naval route schedules to foreign conglomerates. He told her that the evidence was hidden inside a legendary, rumored book of blackmail known as the Sterling Ledger. But Tristan lacked the code to crack it, and Genevieve lacked the power to execute it. The Duke offered her an indecent, magnificent proposal. He offered her his name, his untouchable title, and the full, crushing weight of his protection against her uncle. In exchange, she would sign a prenuptial agreement that guaranteed her total financial independence, and she would use her father's cipher to systematically dismantle the men who had ruined both of their families. But there was a catch. To ensure that Reginald didn't panic and destroy the ledger before the High Court could verify the fraud, they had to let the trap play out to the very end. Genevieve had to walk into the Grand Mayfair ball, wearing her scullery uniform, carrying a heavy silver tray, and allow her uncle to publicly mock her to keep his defense walls completely down. She had to swallow her pride, wear her oldest clothes, and play the part of the broken stray for 72 hours. Genevieve looked at the towering titan before her, held his intense gaze without flinching, and accepted the terms. She told him she had survived 6 months of torment in the dark. She could easily survive 3 days of fools celebrating her ruin. Which brings the narrative directly back to this exact moment inside the blinding marble ballroom of Mayfair. The waltz music is swelling, the chandeliers are blazing, and Lord Reginald is currently standing in the center of the room, holding a glass of champagne, flanked by his wealthy co-conspirators. He has just spotted Genevieve standing near the service doors, carrying a heavy silver tray of clean crystal flutes. He approaches her with a loud, condescending laugh, uttering his public insult, his voice booming loud enough for half the aristocracy to hear, calling her a ruined, left-on-the-shelf spinster who has finally run out of time to find a suitor. The surrounding crowd is staring, hungry for the spectacle of her tears. Reginald is smiling a wicked, triumphant smile, fully believing he has broken her before the entire peerage. But as Genevieve stands there, her face remains a perfect, unreadable mask of absolute indifference. She doesn't lower her head. She doesn't utter a word of defense. She simply takes a slow, elegant step forward. Because beneath her plain white apron, her skin is warm against a heavy band of Welsh gold set with a flawless, square-cut diamond that has belonged to the Westford estate for 3 centuries. She lets them laugh. She lets them whisper. She watches them walk directly into the jaws of a trap they spent 3 years digging for themselves. To replicate this level of absolute strategic dominance, when faced with people who want to see you fail, you must implement the exact 5-part tactical framework executed by elite strategists throughout history. This is the blueprint of the sovereign reversal, and it requires you to systematically separate your emotions from your objectives. Phase 1. Code the safe. The first phase requires absolute information asymmetry. You must never confront an antagonist with rumors, theories, or half-baked accusations. The moment you speak out before your evidence is ironclad, you alert the predator, allowing them to move their assets, burn their files, and rewrite the narrative to make you appear unstable. When Genevieve was locked in her uncle's house, she didn't waste her energy shouting through the doors or threatening him with exposure. She sat by the dim light of a single candle, meticulously analyzing the internal manifests, siphoning the data, and translating her father's forensic codes until she had the exact bank draft numbers, dates, and forged signatures recorded. You must make yourself an academic master of your enemy's financial and professional footprints before you ever let them know you are watching. Phase 2. Feed the mirror. The second phase is the most difficult to execute, as it requires you to completely suppress your ego. It is called feeding the mirror. When an oppressor attempts to publicly humiliate you or drag your reputation through the mud, your instinctual psychological response is to fight back, to match their energy, or to explain your side of the story to the onlookers. You must understand that high society and toxic environments do not care about the truth, they care about the theater. If you fight back with hot anger, you provide them with the exact spectacle they are looking for. Instead, you must become a mirror. If they wish to believe you are defeated, you let them see a face of absolute submission. You dress in the simple colors of their expectations. You let them crow, you let them brag, and you let them celebrate their apparent victory right in front of you. Arrogance is a powerful psychological narcotic. The more an oppressor believes they have completely broken your spirit, the sloppier they become in their daily operations. They stop checking the locks on their safes, they stop monitoring their correspondence, and they begin to speak their crimes aloud because they believe you are too weak to ever use the information against them. Phase 3. Secure the shield. No one wins a war entirely alone. While you are maintaining your mask of public submission, you must simultaneously seek out and secure an elite alignment of power. You need a shield that exists entirely outside your enemy's sphere of influence. Genevieve understood that if she took her father's stolen ledgers to the local city magistrates, her uncle's deep pockets and political connections would have her locked in an asylum before sunset. The system was rigged in his favor. Therefore, she bypassed the local network entirely and aligned her destiny with the Duke of Westford, a man whose financial capital, federal standing, and military leverage made him completely untouchable by local corruption. When you are looking for an ally or a protector in a professional or personal war, you do not look for someone who is merely sympathetic to your pain. Sympathy cannot fight a legal battle. You look for someone who possesses a sovereign level of power and who has a distinct, vested strategic interest in seeing your oppressor dismantled. Phase 4. Let the trap breathe. Once your evidence is coded, your mask is secure, and your shield is locked into position, you must execute the most critical phase of the operation. You must let the trap breathe. This is the period of calculated suspension. You do not strike the moment you have the weapon. You wait for the exact moment when your enemy has overextended themselves so far into the public eye that their eventual fall will be completely irreversible. You let them host their grand dinners, you let them announce their business mergers, and you let them lay out their fraudulent documents on the table in front of the highest authorities available. You want them to climb to the very peak of their mountain of pride. Why? Because the higher they stand on their platform of public arrogance, the greater the velocity of their eventual drop, and the less ground they will have to steady themselves when the floor is violently ripped from beneath their feet. Phase 5. The unmasking execution. The final phase is the absolute, unyielding execution of the trap. When you strike, you do not strike with a series of small, nagging complaints or public arguments. You strike cleanly, legally, and all at once, ensuring there is absolutely no room for an alternative interpretation or a quick escape. You bring the highest authorities to the room. You present the raw, verified, undeniable data directly to the people who hold the power of immediate arrest or financial liquidation. You do not speak with anger. You speak with the chilling, detached clarity of an executioner reading a death warrant. You let the data do the talking, and you watch as their entire house of cards crumbles into absolute dust before they even realize you were the one who pulled the pin. Which brings us directly back to the crowded, suffocating heat of the Mayfair ballroom. The waltz music is reaching its peak, and Lord Reginald is standing there, his face contorted into a smug, triumphant sneer as he waits for Genevieve to break down in front of the entire assembly. The silence in the immediate vicinity is thick, heavy, and pregnant with the cruel amusement of the elite. But before Reginald can utter another condescending word, a sharp, deafening sound echoes from the front entrance of the mansion. The heavy, mahogany double doors are not just opened. They are violently thrown back against the plaster walls with a force that shatters the delicate glass of a nearby display case. The grand waltz music screeches to an immediate, agonizing halt. The violinists lower their bows, the cellist misses a note, and within 10 seconds, the sweeping melody sputters into a terrifying, dead silence. Standing in the threshold of the ballroom, his silhouette framed against the freezing London fog outside, is Tristan Pendleton, the Duke of Westford. He looks wilder, more imposing, and infinitely more dangerous than the immaculate gentleman society remembers. He wears a severe, black evening coat that emphasizes his broad shoulders. His dark hair is slightly damp from the coastal rain, and his piercing, ice-blue eyes are burning with an intense, furious fire that instantly drops the temperature of the room by 20 degrees. He moves down the grand marble staircase not with the measured, polite etiquette of a guest, but with the slow, predatory grace of a wolf entering a slaughterhouse. The crowd of aristocrats parts before him like the Red Sea, mothers frantically dragging their daughters out of his path as he strides directly toward the service doors where Genevieve stands. Lord Reginald's smug smile instantly vanishes, replaced by a sudden, brittle panic. He swallows hard, his knees visibly shaking as the towering Duke stops mere inches from his face, completely dominating his personal space. Reginald attempts to plaster on a practiced, sycophantic grin, puffing out his chest as he stammers a desperate greeting, trying to steer the conversation toward a shipping tax to save face. But Tristan doesn't even look at the bill. He stands there like an immovable mountain of aristocratic stone, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle ticks violently in his cheek. When he finally speaks, his voice is a deep, resonant baritone that carries effortlessly to every single corner of the silent room. He asks Reginald if he truly considered himself an authority on what constitutes a spoiled prize, his tone dripping with a lethal, quiet gravel that promises immediate bloodshed. Reginald turns an ugly, mottled red, his chest heaving as he frantically stammers that he was merely defending society's honor against a penniless, compromised ward, a simple kitchen maid who has no place in a respectable ballroom. Tristan lets out a sharp, dangerous bark of a laugh, a sound that cuts through the air like a cracking whip. He turns his back on the trembling uncle, facing the entire assembly of England's elite. His piercing eyes lock onto every single matron who had whispered, every lord who had chuckled, and every coward who had turned their back on Genevieve only moments before. Slowly, deliberately, Tristan reaches down and takes Genevieve's left hand in his. With agonizing slowness, his long fingers pull back the plain white fabric of her sleeve, exposing her bare skin to the blazing, bright light of the grand chandeliers. And there, resting triumphantly on her ring finger, is the legendary Westford heirloom, the massive, square-cut sapphire ring catching the light like a drop of blue fire. The Duke looks out at the stunned, paralyzed room and announces with absolute, terrifying finality that they are speaking of his Duchess. He tells them that Lady Genevieve and he were legally wed 3 days prior in a private ceremony, and that she has borne their pathetic mockery, their malicious rumors, and their financial tyranny with a dignity that none of them could ever hope to possess. He steps closer to Reginald, towering over the older man until Reginald is forced to lean back against the mahogany tea table. Tristan whispers a vow that ensures half the room can hear. An insult to the Duchess of Westford is an explicit declaration of war against the entire Westford Empire. Tristan turns back to her, the iron mask of the ruthless Duke completely melting away as he looks down into her eyes, revealing a raw, boundless adoration that leaves her breathless. He offers his arm, a rare, genuine smile lifting the corner of his mouth as the orchestra, desperately scrambling to recover from the shock, strikes up a sweeping Viennese waltz. Tristan pulls her into his arms, his large hand pressing firmly against the small of her back as they spin across the checkered floor, the absolute, unassailable rulers of the British Empire. The rest of high society can only watch in complete, paralyzed awe as the woman they called a hopeless kitchen maid takes her rightful place as a queen. But as they glide effortlessly through the center of the room, away from the watching eyes of the ton, Tristan leans down until his breath ghosts over her ear. The warmth of his frame is a shield against the room, but the words that tear from his throat are completely devoid of celebration. He tells her that while they were securing the ledgers from her uncle's safe an hour ago, his shadow agents intercepted a final dispatch destined for Westminster. He whispers that her father hadn't been killed because of a simple shipping fraud or a local corporate sabotage ring. Lord Reginald was merely a small-minded puppet being paid by an underground network deeply embedded within the government itself. Tristan states that the bank ciphers currently locked inside his safe are the only things keeping an international assassin from targeting her sister tonight. And as the waltz carries them into the light of the final chandelier, Genevieve looks out into the rainy London night, her pulse quickening with a sudden, chilling dread as she realizes that her uncle was just the first pawn on the board. The true architect of her father's murder is currently sitting inside the Prime Minister's inner cabinet, waiting for the safe to be blown. He informs Reginald that by tomorrow morning, every single line of credit his banks hold over the Sinclair estate will be called in full, His assets will be frozen by order of the Federal Treasury, and he will not be welcome in any club, any parlor, or any city where the Pendleton name holds sway. Before Reginald can even summon the breath to argue, the heavy doors swing open a second time. Stepping into the light of the ballroom is Chief Inspector Frederick Aberline of Scotland Yard's Special Branch, flanked by a dozen heavily armed Bow Street runners. They march straight across the floor, bypassing the staring aristocrats, and seize Lord Reginald by the arms. The inspector unfurls a damp parchment sealed with the Prime Minister's personal crest, reading the charges aloud for the entire room to hear. High treason, grand embezzlement of treasury funds, and conspiracy resulting in the death of a Crown officer. Reginald lets out a high-pitched, hysterical shriek, his face turning a stark, naked white as the iron manacles are clapped onto his wrists. He looks wildly toward the crowd, begging his business partners to defend him, but they are already turning their faces away, desperate to distance themselves from a dead man. As Reginald is dragged sobbing and screaming out into the freezing mud of the London night, his empire of blackmail completely collapses into ash before the very society he sought to rule. The heavy oak doors slam shut with a definitive, echoing thud, sealing Lord Reginald's fate and leaving the grand ballroom plunged into a profound, absolute silence. The threat that had haunted Genevieve's family for 6 grueling months is entirely gone. The shipping docks are legally hers. Her father's name has been completely cleared before the entire world, and her fortune is secured for the rest of her natural life.
The trap has officially closed around Mayfair, but the execution is far from over. If you believe Tristan Pendleton is the only monster holding a targeting matrix over this empire, you are tragically mistaken. The next safe door is already swinging open, and the documents waiting inside will make this evening's betrayal look like a mere parlor trick. Make sure your notifications are set and your eyes are on this space. Click to lock in your spot so you don't miss a single second when the next chapter drops in the coming week. Until then, remember, the wolves are already on the move.